Have you ever been in a position where you're really into a game, put it down with the intent to go back to it later, and then just never pick it up again? I sure as hell have. My Steam library is littered with the corpses of half-finished games I abandoned in favour of playing the hot new thing for 5 hours, and then not going back to that either. It's a real problem, and one I'm sure you're probably familiar with. I fully intend to go back and finish Frostpunk, and Astroneer, and Grim Dawn, and Mankind Divided, but I know deep down I'm not likely to get around to them anytime soon. Point is, an endless backlog of games is basically a part of life nowadays, but that makes the games that don't end up falling into this trap even more interesting. The entire catalogue of indie darling Supergiant falls into this category for me, and the most recent title, Hades, which is still in early access, is an excellent example of a game I just couldn't put down. Hades sees you playing as Zagreus, son of the eponymous Lord of the Underworld who's trying to escape hell. In Hades, as in a lot of roguelikes, gameplay is structured in a familiar pattern. First, you start in hell with only some basic abilities to your name, then you collect a bunch of power-ups as you explore, gradually fighting tougher and tougher enemies until one of these stupid bomb guys gets you and sends you right back to your dad's house. It's here you can have a look at all your new stuff your hard work has just unlocked and get ready to head out once again. You'll perform this sequence of actions over and over as you play, and by adding new elements like different weapons or god powers into every run but keeping this fundamental structure the same, Supergiant can keep things fresh while still allowing you to build your mastery of the underlying systems over time. In actual game design terms used by actual game developers, which is to say not me, this is what's called a gameplay loop. A series of repeated actions or emotional states that serves as the foundation for everything you do in a game. Gameplay loops can be found all over the place, from shooters, to RPGs, to narrative games, and yes, even roguelikes. They're a pretty foundational game design lesson, and I think it's really important to learn about what they do, and why they work, to better understand why particular games can keep our attention, and why some end up languishing in the backlog. As well as some other reasons that will, become apparent later. Hades' cycle of death and rebirth is far from its only gameplay loop. In fact, most games operate using multiple loops of different lengths and scales, with some being as short as seconds. For example, in the equally hellish Doom, the main gameplay loop of entering a room, shooting bad guys until they're dead, grabbing whatever they dropped and zooming off to the next pack can resolve multiple times in a minute. And as anyone who's played Doom before will know, this particular sequence of events takes up basically all of your playtime. These quick, mechanically intensive loops that you spend a lot of time directly engaging with are often called core loops, which is a phrase you may have heard before. It's very important to make sure a game's foundational mechanical interactions feel fun to use, because you'll be going through the motions of their core loops maybe hundreds of times in any given play session. A single platforming challenge with an approach, execution and recovery in Mario is a core loop older than a significant percentage of people watching this video, and Nintendo have famously always gone to great lengths to ensure that Mario is fun to simply move around, because that's what you'll spend 99% of your time doing. The different challenges themselves in any Mario game are just layers on top of that same loop, so if the underlying gameplay isn't fun, you'll just get bored of the different mechanical gimmicks no matter how creative they are. Short and snappy core loops are what keep players engaged in the short term, and the inherent satisfaction of pulling off each step helps them to internalise the fundamental gameplay patterns the developers expect them to know off by heart. The ideal core loop, weirdly, is one that the player rarely actually thinks about. In the best shmups, you blast formations of bad guys on instinct, and great action games train players to act quickly and rely on their knowledge of attack patterns and combos, two core loops, to get them through each fight. Core loops exist as a constant foundation that underpins everything else, something the game can always return to after finishing with bigger stuff. However, for much larger, longer gameplay loops, the opposite is true. Because a single cycle might take hours to resolve, it's much harder to directly tie it to the mechanics. Take the cycle of conquest in a strategy game like Total War. First, you pick where you want to invade, muster your armies, duke it out with the enemy, either win or lose the war, and then either cement your hold on your new territory or slink back home to regroup. You might only get through one or two of these loops in any given play session, and it's completely disconnected from the moment-to-moment gameplay, which is mostly just clicking through menus or telling your dudes which orcs to shoot. Longer gameplay loops are much more concerned with offering an abstract source of motivation and something to come back to, rather than immediate fun. Old school JRPGs turned a lot of people off because their core loops, that being individual turns in a combat encounter, are usually pretty boring. However, Die-hard fans of RPGs love them because they place a massive emphasis on high-level meta gameplay loops, where you get to see your characters and the story evolve over tens of hours. The smaller gameplay loops are just steps towards that eventual goal. By offering up plot mysteries and the opportunities to develop your characters, games can not only keep you entertained, but also give you a goal to shoot for. And the need to experience the satisfying resolutions to these loops is something that will bring you back to the game after the more immediate thrill of the gameplay has faded. It's by learning why gameplay loops work, and how they relate to player motivation, that we can understand that the problem of unengaging games is actually a two-pronged issue. The more emphasis a game places on short gameplay loops, the more engaging it is in the moment, but it's going to be more difficult to give players a reason to come back long term. Games with very long gameplay loops that delay satisfaction, on the other hand, need you to put in a lot of effort before you start having fun, and so they end up in the "I'll get around to it one day" part forever. So, how do compelling games fix both these problems at the same time? Well, more often than not, that special breed of endlessly playable games organise their entire structure around just one or occasionally two medium-length gameplay loops supported by longer and shorter ones. This ensures that gameplay has a predictable rhythm and structure, while still giving players a nice amount of short-term goals to direct them to where the fun stuff is. For all the hate I and other people have given them over the years, stuff like towers and bases to capture, overused they may be, serve as anchors for the medium-length gameplay loop of exploring a new area, conquering it, and then moving on. Just imagine if Breath of the Wild had no shrines, or if Far Cry had no cult outposts. You'd have vast swathes of an open world where there's basically nothing to do but travel to the next story segment, and it'll be really hard to get into a nice consistent gameplay groove. The trope of splitting up games into themed areas where players engage with the same central gameplay loop 8 times, because it's always 8 for some reason, is also an example of this tactic. As much as people claim to want total freedom, the sheer directionlessness of a hypothetical open-world Pokemon game, for example, would more often than not lead to people getting lost, confused, and critically bored before they completed the game. But, by splitting things up into 8 gym leaders and 1 or 2 crime syndicates, each containing a number of goes around the core battling loop, devs can ensure that their players don't feel overwhelmed as they slowly progress towards completing the next big story loop, which are usually capped off with a rival battle boss fight. A lot of games, rather than having a single main loop, have 2 main loops instead that each feed into each other. SteamWorld Dig 2 is a great example of this particular style, with the entire structure of the game being built around the dual loops of mining in the caves and then upgrading back in town. Here's how it works. As you adventure deeper and deeper into the mines of El Machino, mining minerals and killing baddies, eventually your pack will fill up or your torch will run out, and you'll be forced to return to the surface. This means that you're invariably going to have to say goodbye to some precious goodies or an unexplored part of the dungeon. Once you get to the surface, you can sell your haul to buy fancy new upgrades, but things are balanced in such a way that you'll never quite have enough to buy everything that you want, giving you a new goal to shoot for as you drop back into the mines in search of that loot you abandoned in a constant cycle of effort, rewards, and new opportunities. This loop in SteamWorld Dig plays out once every 10 or so minutes, and is broken up occasionally by an optional puzzle dungeon, with the entire zones taking about an hour-long play session to fully traverse. Having an ideal session length in mind when developing a game can be very helpful for figuring out how long gameplay loops should be. Ideally, you want a play session to last for about as long as a single big meta loop, and to get in a few rotations of medium length loops in along the way. By following this structure, each play session can feel like a satisfying experience, but there'll always be something new for players to do when they come back. Pikmin is fantastic at providing a constant sense of progress contained within a rhythmic central gameplay loop. The strict schedule imposed by Pikmin's day-based structure is the key to its endlessly playable design. Each morning you'll start off by replenishing your forces from the previous day's losses, the afternoon will be spent forging into new terrain, fighting bosses or finding loot, and the evening will be spent in a mad dash to bring all your ill-gotten gains back to your ship before night falls and nocturnal predators devour any Pikmin left outside. Your average play session of an hour or 2 is enough to get in maybe 5 or 6 days, which is about enough time to complete, or at least fully explore, an entire area. For a second example, Factorio has a much longer session length of a few hours, and from experience, they're usually paced around each technological milestone. Building up to unlocking the next type of research takes around an entire play session, with smaller objectives like researching other techs, developing production line expansions and alien genocide missions to keep you engaged along the way. Even games with tiny play lengths like Devil Daggers still follow this structure. Each 1 to 2 minute long playthrough is split into distinct phases. You've got the intro with the squid towers, then you've got your first upgrade and the first spider, then the second upgrade and your first centipede, etc. This helps to ground what's otherwise a very chaotic game, with a very intense core loop, in some sort of structure, and makes marking your progress, as well as creating goals for yourself, much easier. Gameplay loops are powerful things, and as we've already seen, by using them in the right way, and by leveraging the inherent structure of video games to our advantage, we can make great games even more fun and satisfying to play, as well as encourage people to stick with titles that might take a while to really get going. Unfortunately, there is a flip side. And that's the fact that, just like how an understanding of gameplay loops can turn good games into great ones, gameplay loops can also turn a game that's merely bad into an exploitative, addictive one. Basically, any crappy mobile game that tries to swindle you out of your cash uses gameplay loops to manipulate you into playing, and more importantly paying, more. Candy Crush's core loop of matching things is flashy and satisfying, there's a lot of levels to beat to give you a sense of progress, and the whole thing is divided into arbitrary milestones to get you to come back. These are the same tactics used in games that are actually good, like, Bejeweled, but here the motivation is to trick you into buying microtransactions by deliberately cutting loops short and making you feel unsatisfied until you pay to keep playing. This is kind of my motivation for making this video, as well as a lot of others on the channel. Gameplay loops are a fact of game design, and that's a good thing, but equally, gameplay loops can fool us into wasting time on games that we don't actually enjoy. No disrespect intended to those who do like the game, but I'm not a fan of Destiny 2. However, I got through the entire campaign and a fair bit of DLC before I realised that I wasn't actually having that much fun. This was because the game has a phenomenally satisfying core shooter loop and constantly strings you along with little upgrades and milestones to make you feel like you're meaningfully progressing when you kind of aren't. By trying to understand how games and their mechanics work, not only can we better appreciate the titles we love, but we can also learn to make more informed decisions about which games we play and why. For every Hades, SteamWorld Dig or Devil Daggers, there are a million crappy games wanting to steal your money and your time. And the only way to really know for sure is to ask yourself whether you're really having fun, or whether you're just going through the motions of a gameplay loop. If the answer is the latter, it's probably time to take a break and go and do something else. As integral as gameplay loops are, there are a bunch of great games that only work because they're weirdly paced, or because they lack an easy core loop to build around. Stuff like the crime-solving, video-watching Her Story, which relies on a lack of rhythm to get you to make assumptions about the central mystery, or AI War, which is a strategy game that never lets you feel like a conqueror, or any of those games I mentioned at the start of the video. So go and give those games in your backlog a second chance, and keep gameplay loops in mind. By figuring out what kind of rhythm a game wants you to get into, and by playing along, you might just be able to turn a game you've always wanted to get around to into your new obsession. Just make sure it's not trying to steal your money or anything, okay? Hello, and thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to fund any future blind stumbles into the gaping maw of game design, then make sure to support me on Patreon like these fantastic friends, who are Alex DeLonch, Asaran, Alno94, Baxter Heel, Brian Notariani, Calvin Han, Chill, Daniel Metjes, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Evie, Ibathon, Jesse Ryan, Jonathan Christensen, Joshua Binswanger, Lee Berman, Lucas Slack, Lunar Eagle 1996, Mace Window 54, Max Filipov, Patrick Romberg, Philby the Bilby, Fody Homeless, Prospero, Ray's Dad, Sam Myers, Samuel Vanderplatz, Strateger in Ultima, Yaron Miran, and Chow. If you'd like to support someone who isn't me, and don't worry, I totally get it, then consider taking a look at Chris Franklin / Errant Signal, which is one of the OG video gaming essay channels, and it's still going, and it was a real inspiration for me, so go and watch that stuff. It's a lot of narrative deep dives into obscure indie games and horror things, loads of great content there, give it a look. Right, with that done, I will see you around because I have another video to work on, probably, or I'm just going to go and eat cake. Who knows? Bye!